Welcome to part 4 of the bathroom remodel. In this video, I'll show you how to put the tile in. I'll also show you how to grout. Some additional tools you may want is a laser level, sponges, plenty of buckets and water, an epoxy float here. We got a notch trowel, we got a putty knife basically, we got a angle grinder, we got some safety equipment as well for that. We got a tile snapping tool. We got a tile file. We got a grout removal tool. That speed square is going to come into handy. These chisels might help if you run into an issue and you have to remove a tile. These right here are helpful for caulking. And then you got the tile nippers as well. So also a handy tool is having one of these hole saws for cutting through the tile when you're trying to cut the hole for the shower head. An old toothbrush is nice for wiping out excess thin set mortar. We are going with glazed ceramic tile, the River Edge flint, and so you can buy it by one at a time or by the carton. The cartons down here come with 10 each. And we'll be getting some of these bullnose pieces for the border. You might want some Mosaic tile as an accent, and so we are going to go with the Silver Medley Mosaic tile. You're going to want some polymer modified thin set mortar, and so you have some different options. You can get your thin set mortar in white or gray, so keep that in mind. You're going to want some grout. I'm going with Power Grout in the mist color. This one never needs to be sealed. You also might want the matching caulk for change of plane situations. You can do it unsanded or sanded. I'm going with the sanded siliconized acrylic latex caulk in the mist variety. Let's start tiling. Now the first step is to dry fit everything and get an idea of how you want things laid out. And so there was 3 different options that I was considering. One is to start a full tile over here and then have it disappear into this wall. And the reason I didn't do that is because it won't line up nicely with the wall. And so I want to look like I'm continuing the floor up onto the wall. And so that didn't work. The other option is to have the grout line centered. And so that would work, but you have these 2 little pieces over on left and right. And so what I decided is that we would have a tile centered, and then you'll have a little bit of a bigger piece over here on the left and right. And so I will probably go with the design of having a tile in the center running all the way up. I'm starting with a full tile near the shower pan. We're going to have a bunch of smaller pieces cut here. We're going to have some smaller pieces cut here, smaller pieces cut there, and then the 2 tricky cuts. We're going to have a cut for the toilet flange there, and we're also going to have a cut behind here for the vent that is a little bit tricky. But other than that, it's mostly just snap cuts that can be done quite easily. The first thing we're going to do is mark a center line right here. Now I use a dry erase marker to mark the tile halfway. Alright, now I put some spacers between the tile and the shower. Push it nicely up against the shower, and then line up my center of the tile with the center line that I drew. And pretty much everything now is based off this tile, which is why you really want to get, your first little bit of tiles perfect. That way the rest of the job is a little easier. And so now we start dry laying these tiles. We put spacers in between. These are the full tiles. We need to snap cut each side. Both sides are going to be 9 3/8. Let's use the dry erase marker to mark the tile at 9 3/8. A pencil works pretty good for marking too. You just want to make sure not to damage the surface of the tile. Just use something that you can easily get rid of afterwards. Now you line up your wheel with your marks and you push down and roll and score the surface here of your tile. Now you can see the line that was created in the tile. Now we're going to lift up and push down with this piece here, and it should snap the tile in that location. That's the path of least resistance. There it is. So now you can see how it snapped pretty nicely. You can also use tile nippers or something like that, or a saw to kind of nip the corner that wasn't quite done very well right there. But this is going to be hidden. This edge is going to be hidden anyway by the baseboard, so it doesn't really matter. You can also use one of these files to file down any imperfections. All right, let's place our piece in here with the spacers. Remember that the baseboard is going on. It'll look something like this. And so that's going to be covered up anyway. Doesn't really matter. All of the snap cuts for the floor are going to be done like this. The other thing you can do is mark your tiles so that when you put them back in, you know exactly which one goes where. So the first row is done. The second row is going to have the toilet flange, and so that's going to be a little bit more complicated. Let's start working on that. Let's do the hardest cut here around the toilet flange. This part right here is going to be hidden under the toilet flange, so I don't really care all that much about it chipping. However, I do want to put a little bit of painter's tape there to help prevent that, and also to allow me to see when I'm cutting a little bit better. We're going to use an angle grinder for this with a 4.5 inch dry/wet tile cutting wheel. Now this thing has an incredible amount of torque, accelerating this wheel up to its final angular velocity very quickly. You can see right here. And so you really want to be careful with this. You got the guard here to protect your fingers from getting in there. We also want to wear eye protection. We also want to wear ear protection to prevent those sound waves from over stressing your ears. And then we also have a dust mask or respirator to prevent unnecessary particles from getting into our lungs. We are going to use a little bit of water for two reasons. One is that water has a really high heat capacity. It's very good at sucking up a lot of that thermal energy being generated, and so that will prevent the wheel from getting too hot and overstressing that wheel, causing it to wear a little bit quicker. And so that's one reason. The other reason is that as the dust is being produced, if the water is there, if it's a little bit wet, it will prevent some of that dust from getting into the air, and so it won't be as messy. I highly recommend doing the cut outside if you can. Otherwise the dust is going to get all over your house. I'm doing it in my garage because there's snow outside. Alright, now I just have to nip a little bit of this tile out. Notice how I want the toilet flange on top of the finished floor. I don't have to do a double wax ring or anything like that. It'll be at the proper height, and I won't have to worry about the wax ring not having the proper seal against the bottom of the toilet. Because I'm not installing a new toilet flange afterwards, it's a little bit tricky to make sure that I have the holes to go through with my screws down into the subfloor. You can buy a special bit for your drill to drill through here. The idea is that we need to somehow get through the tile And so let's figure out exactly where the holes are going to be. And remember that these bolts come up into your toilet and they have to fit in here and then turn. And on either side, you want them to be parallel to the wall. And so we'll figure out where we need these holes and we'll prepare for them beforehand. Okay, I'm just going to cut little slots for the screw holes. All right, last fit. All right, we're good to go. I'm going to cut the tile for the floor register now. All right, the tile for the floor register is ready to be cut. I taped it out to kind of guide me. I need to notch out tile 23 and 25 around the door frame. We need to use the oscillating saw to take a little bit more of this trim off at the bottom so that the tile can go underneath here. Let's mix up some thin set mortar and get these tiles down. So we're going to do one row at a time and make sure that you get some nice ridges in the same direction so that when you push the tile down on it, the ridges collapse and there's no air that can get trapped under that. We also want to back butter the tiles so we can ensure 100% coverage. It's nice to take a toothbrush and just kind of take some of the thin set out of the joints so that when you come over it with the grout, it's a little easier. You can use an epoxy float to push down, make sure that all of the tiles are at the same level so that you don't have tiles sticking up. Especially focus on the corners here. Make sure that all your corners are perfect. going to fur out the wall a little bit here with some joint compound. That way I can go over this nicely with some quarter round at the end and cover that up with trim. It's time to tile the walls. It's a good idea to plan out what you're doing beforehand. A laser level can definitely come in handy. Since your eye is drawn to the niche, I'm pretty much taking all of my factory edges and putting them near the niche, and then I'm going to have the cut edges disappear to the left, disappear to the right, disappear up into the ceiling, and then disappear down into the floor. And so your eye is going to be drawn to the niche, and I want everything around the niche to be as symmetrical as possible, and avoid having the cut edges as much as possible. And so one of the ways that I'm doing that is I'm having a full tile right here, and then on the top and bottom I'm going to put the mosaic tile there, and then I'm going to have a double stripe, so I'll put another mosaic tile there, and that'll continue. That way I don't have to have any rough edges there. If you look at a tile that is cut, you'll see, for example, here that we have the factory edge nice and a little bit rounded there, but then the cut edge is kind of violent and sharp, and so we'll take those sharp edges and make them disappear as much as we can. Also down here, this is the plan for the bench, and so I'd like the grout lines to drain the water as effectively as possible. Also, the bull nose is being used not only to border the niche here, it's also being used down here on the bench, and that's because this nice rounded part will allow you to have a nice transition between the two planes. Same thing here, and so you don't have a sharp edge when you go to sit. Also, there'll be mosaic on the front like this, and so that's the plan. But remember, if you don't have a plan, then this is going to come out maybe not as you want it to. Also, a ledger board could be helpful, especially when you're doing something like this. If you're not starting at the bottom, it's a little bit tricky, and so a lot of people use some sort of a ledger board. You can screw it into the wall, but then you got to worry about penetrating your waterproofing. So the other option is just to support it with two boards, and so that might be able to allow you to start somewhere other than the bottom, and that way you can get the look that you want. You'll also notice that the niche is not quite level. You'll see the bottom of the laser line here, and then it kind of cuts through the tile over there, and so that's an easy fix. We'll just use the thin set mortar to raise this side up just a little bit, and so just keep that in mind. When you go to do the mortar, you can fix any slight imperfections. A speed square is nice to make these 45-degree cuts. I'm marking these 45-degree cuts with a little bit of painter's tape. We need to cut some half pieces of the mosaic tile. Let's mix up a small batch of thin set mortar for the bench and a little bit of the niche. can see the level line is pretty much perfect here. The level line is also pretty much perfect right here, and then one more to check. And the level line is also perfect right there, pretty much telling me that it's a nice and even slope all the way. And so we'll let this dry. We got the ledger board there holding it up, and we got the bench pretty much done. And after that dries, we'll start with some of the other stuff. Alright, we'll let that dry, and then the hard part is pretty much done. I'm going to do this cut without any power tools just to show you that it's possible. Let's score and snap this piece at a 45. There's the line, we'll see if we can snap it. Alright, there it is. We'll see how it turned out. Turned out pretty good, and you can definitely fix it with the tile nipper or a file if you need to. Just goes to show you that most of this work can actually be done with zero power tools if you have the time. I've done a few of these angled cuts just with the tile nipper. You can nip along the edge there, and then any rough spots afterwards you can clean up with the file. So we have some options here now that we're tiling this wall. One option is to start with a full tile here and then have another full tile and then have this tile cut. Another option is to start here, full tile, have this side cut. Another option is to have the grout line be directly in the center, which would make it really easy to cut around the mixing valve, and also it would make it really easy to cut around the shower head up here. And then the other option, I guess, would be if you wanted to center a tile on this wall here and then have cut edges on the left and right. And so I guess two options, you have cut edges on the left and right, and then the other two options you only have one edge that's cut. I think what I'm going to do is go with a full tile here on the outside, and so it'll be a nice clean edge on the outside, easy to cover up with the trim. And then I'll have it terminate here with the cut edge butted up against here, and then that'll be caulked to cover up that cut edge. One thing that you can do is make a template out of cardboard, and then you can easily figure out where that cut needs to be. And then now you have the template to put on top of the tile, and then you can just follow right along where you need to cut to get the perfect cut. So I basically just took the angle grinder and followed my template perfectly, and now it should fit like a glove. As you can see, it fits pretty well. I'm doing another template here. I have it marked with the laser where it's going to fall. And so I'll take this off. You'll see that that gives us plenty of room to come around here with the cover. And then we'll just put this thing on the tile. Basically, you cut it pretty messy like this, and then you go in and clean it up. One tip is to use a square in the corner to get a nice 90-degree angle. Another tip is you can see how that tile is right on the laser. Well, that's because I actually had to use a little piece of tile to lift it up a little bit more than my spacer. And so little pieces of tile, broken tile, can be used as well. You can clean up the tile and clean up the cover and get a good idea of what it's going to look like. Now you want the delta with the little drain indent there at the bottom. and then eventually screw that in. But that's looking pretty good. All right, for this cut, we hold it here, mark it, then we move the tile over to here, we hold it there and mark it. We extend those marks over with the square, and then you can just tape it. And then you use the drill with the hole saw on it. It's a diamond hole saw, making sure that you're not on the hammer setting. And you just lightly drill first at an angle. And then once you get it started, just kind of come over the top and then just drill all the way through. To prepare for the grout, you want to make sure that the cracks are pretty much clean. You don't have a lot of thin set mortar sticking up. And you can see here how what we can basically do is take the sponge, squeeze it all the way out, and then do a good cleaning before the grouting process starts. It'll make your life a lot easier. Hopefully the toothbrush did a good job, so you really don't have to do a lot of cleaning out of mortar before grout, but you can use a tool like this and just kind of scrape here and remove a lot of that stuff before grouting. And so that's definitely something that you're going to want to do. You can also carefully scrape off any excess mortar from the tiles, followed by washing with a sponge. It's time to start grouting. They give you some nice steps here on the side that you can follow. They also give you a suggested amount of coverage, and a little chart here tells you based on the tile and then based on the spacings between the tiles approximately how much square footage you can cover. And so this type of grout is power grout. You never need to seal it, and so basically we'll pour some into this bucket and we'll mix a little bit of water with it. Now you can mix the whole bag, but I'm not going to. There's no way I'm going to be able to finish the whole bag, so I'm just going to mix about a third of the bag, let's say. As long as you mix it very similarly, you're not probably going to have a color issue. And then I'll just pour just a little bit of water in there. We'll take our grout float, epoxy float. We'll just kind of mix around that water. And clearly we need more, so Just keep adding water little by little until we get a nice like toothpaste-like consistency pretty much. Obviously you don't want to see any dry powder, but you also don't want it to be really wet either. So I think that might have done it there. Make sure it's really mixed well. You shouldn't see any more powder. Alright, so that's pretty much good. And then we'll go start the process here. Alright, so basically forcing this grout into the gaps here, that's the first goal. Get it all the way down in there, and you want to make sure not to grout between the tile and the tub here, because we're going to actually take a bead of caulk and do that later, because as you step into the shower, there's definitely going to be some flex here, and that grout line is most likely going to crack, so we're going to kind of keep the grout away from that, but we are going to go right up to it, and we'll force it into the gap there. I'll just do a little area. Okay. And this float just basically floats right on the tile here. And what you don't want to do is something like this. If you do this, then you'll see how the float kind of drops down in there and it pulls all of the grout out. And so when you do it, you're supposed to kind of go at an angle, and then that'll leave a nice little amount for you to deal with. And I'll lift up this toilet flange a little bit to get underneath it. It'd be nice if I didn't have to deal with this, but oh well. And so we'll get that grout where it needs to go. And you can see how it's already basically starting to dry. So now we'll be done with that. Now we're going to take a sponge like this, some pretty clean water, and squeeze it out as much as you can. You're going to take the sponge, kind of curl it as you sponge, and you do it once, and then you do it again at an angle, and then you wash it again. And just basically keep doing this until you got the nice lines. And we'll go once, and then twice, and that's it. And again. Okay, here, go once, and then twice. Basically, that's how you do it. Pretty done. So as you can see, there's a haze on the ground now. And so you come back in and you get it one more time with a nice clean bucket of water. Alright, so the floor is basically done with the grouting, and the bench is basically done with the grouting. And so I'll mix up another batch to do the rest. Remember, when you're dealing with a situation where you have a change of plane, also a change of material, you probably don't want to grout. And so that's a better spot for your flexible sealant. And so that will be filled later on, along with below the tile here. That will all be sealed. And also when you have that change of plane, so on the bench here, and on the corners, in the niche area, and then that corner coming down here, you might want to consider using the matching flexible siliconized grout material that usually is sold with the matching color to the grout. That way you can reduce the chance of cracking when you have movement between the planes. This wraps up part 4 to the bathroom remodel. You can see I still have to kind of clean the tiles off after the grout dries, but pretty much all done now with the grouting and the tile. Notice how there's going to be a trim piece here on this side and on this side. I'm also probably going to come in with some crown molding. I'm going to take that fan out and clean it. Got to finish the ceiling here with the joint compound and the texture, and basically the finishing up stage, putting in the shower door in and everything, that will be the last video coming up with part 5.